And so, you know, as long as it looked remotely Victorian, and if you had asked an old man who had lived back then, he would have had Alzheimer back then and not have remembered life that well to say, oh, well, that lap pool is not in the right position. You know, so in the whole movie and film industry did not begin to have, or at least to seek, to at least desire to give to the audience as a message, although they most often lie. Look, we did it accurately. They don't even think that. It was just doing like a fashion show. Like we remotely inspire ourselves, and we practically the costumes we meant as costumes like for a catwalk. And people say, well, in that sense, they often quote Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick. But actually, in many regards, a few years before, in that television series from the BBC was already doing that. Back in the 60s, and it was actually more accurate. Now it is easier because it was set in the late 19th century and it was made in the 60s, so not even 100 years apart. Whereas in Barry Lyndon is set in the late 18th century and the movie was made in the 1970s, so it is practically like 200 years apart. So obviously it is easier to copy something that was the norm to wear not even 100 years ago, like 70, 80, 90 max years ago, rather than 200 years ago. And on top of that, it was made by the BBC living in England, and in England then was the most old-fashioned country, at least in Europe, and still is. And so obviously it was less stuff with it, and also that television series is very cheap, so they only have a few characters to actually dress. Like Barry Lyndon, which is a huge blockbuster, where they had to have a lot of extras to dress and all. So, but actually, I think my supposition is that in the 60s, at least in Britain, probably BBC, which was known for being accurate in costumes, now at 100% accurate, also not. And then especially if it is set in the Middle Ages, the further apart it is set in history, the less accurate it will get. But still, they have always been known for being accurate. Today, the accuracy has gone really downhill, and saying, oh, but yes, but today, if we represent the Victorian era, we are now 50 years into the future, so it is harder. True, it is harder, but you live in England, and you have much more money now, so if you could do it 40 years ago, you can still do it with practically as much effort, because now it is harder, but you have more money. And England is still the most old-fashioned place where you can still find these manufacturers to a certain degree, and you can find antique pieces and all, and you made old pieces back in the past, so why are you making modern crap again? They wear crap. I mean, just take the old costumes we made back in the 60s, whatever. They probably still exist in some warehouse. But forget the BBC today. I have not even watched any modern BBC shows set in that era, late 19th century, or 1890s, or even 1880s. So I'm talking about the television series, that one. To be honest, for that television series, in many regards, it is almost more accurate in terms of the costumes of the men, not the women. The women are less accurate than this. I'm not very qualified to judge women's wear of any time period, so I will sort of leave that on the side. I can only say that series was the first, obviously it was in colour, and it was not the first in colour, but was the first to actually strive to make something accurate. Did they try to make it as accurate as that? The first season, they tried to make it accurate on another level even, but in some regards they failed, even in the first season. But Jeremy Brett never failed, he was always bloody accurate, and the most accurate Sherlock Holmes ever. But first of all, I hate the Watsons. I do not like the Watsons in there. I think they are bad actors, and on top of that, the Watsons they are trying to represent are not what is described in the book, and it not even look like the description of the book, and they do not even get it like Jeremy Brett said himself. He changed his accent to make it like mine, like a conservative RP, whereby they conserved the modern 1980s, 1990s RP, the two Watsons they used, because then the actor changed. Whereby in that television series, also called Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, which ran from 1965, the first season came out in 1965, and 3 years later, the second season, which I'm about to analyse, because the first season has been deleted. And at first they had Douglas Wilmer as Sherlock Holmes, then they changed him to Peter Cushing. Watson was always kept the same actor, Nigel Stock. And he's by far, I don't know what you will say, I know you will say he's copying Nigel Bruce and he looks clumsy and he's not louder than the book and he's too old or too fat or too whatever. No. He is Watson. Read the book. Look at these stupid illustrations which I do not actually like. The Sidney Paget was a bad illustrator. I like the other ones when they changed them or before he was employed. But he looks exactly like the illustrations. And the good thing was these actors, they were so bloody good, especially Nigel Stock. He's the best. He's one of the best actors as Watson. Some were as good as actors, like Ian Hart in two much more recent films. But the problem was that they did not look the part. And in some instances, they were not even trying to make the accent. Now, Nigel Stock and Peter Cushing were born in the 1910s. So they had actually grown up. Their parents, because they were from the upper middle class, their parents would have talked exactly like Holmes and Watson would have talked. The same slang, the same sort of accent and everything. They would have known that word. They would have heard the end of that word, which really ended by 1920 during World War I. So they knew how to represent that word much better. And they are British. They were brought up in these old boarding schools like Sherlock Holmes would have. And so, except Sherlock Holmes would have been brought in then in the 1850s. I'm of this belief that Sherlock Holmes was born in the 1850s, although it's not explicitly said in the books, but never mind. So they still knew that word. Unlike Jeremy Brett, who was born in 1933, and the entire world had changed by then. So Jeremy Brett would have been 10 or 5 years old in 1938. Peter Cushing would have been, he was born in 1913, so he would have been 5 in 1918. Nigel Stock was born in 11, I think. So he would have been 5 in 1916. So they would still have known that world with top hats and detachable collars and frock coats and people talking like me and whatever. And the streets being disgusting and having horses everywhere. They would have known that London. They would have actually, that would have been sort of their daily lives. And so they knew how to make the accent. They directly did it. And the accents are way more accurate than the accents the other characters, apart from Jeremy Brett, who obviously made a great RP, like a great conservative RP. So forget Jeremy, but the other characters in that television series, the way they talked, no. They respected often the dialogues were directly taken from the books, and so people say, oh, it is accurate, they would have talked like that. Yes, they would have talked like that in the book, but in the book they would have used an accent of back then, not a modern Cockney or modern whatever accent. They would have used an old Cockney accent, an old RP accent, which are completely different. And so, now, I will actually analyze the costumes. The costumes, I think, in there are more accurate in terms of realism, for a very simple reason. I will first analyze the extras, and then I will come to Sherlock Holmes and Watson, but first I will do the extras. And to some degrees, I will not really compare with that. I will compare Holmes and Watson's costumes with them, which are more accurate in the older series. But for the extras, I would say in that television series are practically as accurate, if not more. But in some regards, the older one, with Peter Cushing, even for the extras, was more accurate. I'm only talking about the menswear. For the women, they were more accurate in that, because in that 1960s television series, they are wearing clearly a lot of makeup from the 1960s, and it is completely inaccurate, because even for a prostitute, she would not have, because that type of makeup did not exist. So a prostitute would have worn as much makeup as them if she was a vulgar prostitute. I love prostitutes, but I'm saying vulgar in the sense that just like she's like the pornographic prostitute. She might have worn as much makeup as in the 1960s, but not that type of makeup because it did not exist. So having respectable women wear that type of makeup full on 1960s style with 1960s hairdos is completely impossible. So the old series got that completely wrong, but I'm going to analyze the menswear. So, and if you are, I will just say that, if you are into Sherlock Holmes, like me, into the faithfulness to the books, and you love the books, and you want something faithful to the books, there are only 3 adaptations I have seen which are seriously trying to be seriously faithful to the books. What do I mean by seriously trying to be seriously faithful? Because, for example, Robert Doyle Jr. said, and that idiot Guy Ritchie said, oh, we were trying to be faithful to the books. I've never been so faithful. It's sad, just sad.